Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Professor Brigadier Abdul Majid Malik, and the topic of the day is the eyelid lecture number 3. This is the last lecture on the subject of eyelids. Today we will discuss diseases of the eyelid like ptosis and common eyelid tumors. Now coming to slide number 3, that is the slide of learning objectives. What we should learn out of today's session. For you should be able to diagnose ptosis on the basis of clinical features. You can evaluate its severity clinically, order the required investigations to confirm the etiology of the ptosis, then to be able to counsel the patient about the disease and its management and refer to the ophthalmologist if required. The other topic is eyelid tumors. We should be able to differentiate between common eyelid tumors, order basic investigations, and you should know when to refer the patient to ophthalmologist. Now next slide, that is slide number 4. What is ptosis? Eyelid ptosis is simply drooping of upper eyelid, as seen in this photograph of the lady. This is having ptosis, complete ptosis of the right eye. For the purpose of description, we classify ptosis into congenital and acquired. Acquired is further divided into neurogenic, myogenic, aponeurotic, and mechanical on the basis of its etiologies. Now first, what is congenital ptosis? Congenital ptosis is the drooping of eyelid of the baby right from the time of birth. General causes are agenesis of the levator muscle, or absent or abnormal nerve supply of the levator muscle, that is congenital oculomotor nerve problem. And on the basis of etiology, it is divided into various types. The most common is the simple one, as seen in this photograph of the baby. The baby is having left ptosis, whereas right eye is normal. The other variety is synkinetic ptosis. It is an uncommon condition, but is very severe and disabling the patient cosmetically and socially. Why? Because in synkinetic ptosis, the other name for it is Marcus Gunn jaw winking ptosis. What happens that there is aberrant linkage of the oculomotor nerve with the mandibular division of trigeminal nerve that supplies jaw muscles for mastication. Due to this abnormal linkage, each time we close and open our jaw or deviated inwards or outwards, our eyes open and close. Since it is generally monocular, so it causes a lot of disability socially as well as emotionally to the patient, and it is fairly difficult to treat. The third variety is blepharophimosis syndrome. It is very, very severe ptosis and is associated with other lid abnormalities. Now generally, at the time of presentation, If the ptosis is mild, the patient's management is delayed because parents report late. However, if it is uniocular and severe, as in this child in the photograph, parents bring the child earlier for consultation. The most important step in evaluation, note it and remember it, the most important step in the evaluation of a baby or a small child brought to you is to see the corneal light reflex. Just throw the light on the eyes with a torch, and if you see the corneal light reflex in both the eyes, it means ptosis is not covering the pupil and the child is going to develop normal vision. However, as in this case, you can see the light reflex in the center of pupil in the right eye, but it is not visible in the left eye, and as a result, the left eye is going to develop stimulus deprivation amblyopia, that is underdevelopment of vision in that eye due to lack of visual stimulus. And we have to prevent this happening at any cost, because this is the age when vision is developing, and if the treatment is delayed, the child will develop permanent low vision or amblyopia in this eye. So we will go for early surgery as early as possible in this child if the ptosis is complete and is covering the pupil. It is very important to test this, and remember it, you will see the child with the torch and see whether corneal light reflex is present or not. Okay? And then the most important investigation is always MRI scan to find the abnormalities in the nerve supply. Treatment is surgical, I will discuss later. Next slide, slide number 7 is showing neurogenic ptosis. As we are discussing the ptosis individually, we are discussing the way of presentation of the patient, how to evaluate the patient, and how to manage briefly. Now, what is the neurogenic ptosis? It is ptosis due to damage or problem with the nerve supply of the levator muscle, that is oculomotor nerve pathology. It may be due to medical causes or surgical causes. Generally, medical neuropathy is seen in diabetic neuropathy or hypertensive neuropathy, in which there is vascular problem and somatic part of oculomotor nerve gets damaged. Whereas in surgical problem, the nerve damage is due to trauma or due to tumors pressing on the nerve, in which total nerve involving somatic as well as autonomic nerve part is damaged. So what happens in medical neuropathy? The patient presents with history of having either diabetes or hypertension, and history is that the patient got severe headache followed by inability of the eye to open. Eye gets closed automatically and the patient is unable to open the eye. Generally, these patients report in the morning because it happens most commonly in the night hours. They just suffer headache and then take some medicine, and when they come and get up in the morning, they see that one eye is not opening, and they get very, very tense and report to eye OPD. So the typical history is headache followed by ptosis. As you see in picture A of the patient shown here, he is having complete ptosis of left eye, but you are not sure other extraocular muscles supplied by oculomotor nerve are healthy or not. Now just elevate the lid as shown in figure B. Elevate the lid and see underneath what is the position of eyeball. You see there is abduction of the left eye and slight depression due to unopposed actions of lateral rectus and superior oblique, that are the only two muscles not supplied by oculomotor nerve in the eye. So this is a patient of left oculomotor nerve paralysis. The other thing I wanted to discuss is the difference between medical and surgical oculomotor neuropathy. In medical, pupil is spared. If you throw light on the pupil of the affected eye, that will be reacting fairly good because autonomic nerve supply is spared. Only somatic nerve supply is affected in medical causes, and the nerves at the periphery that are autonomic nerve, they are spared. Whereas in surgical problem like trauma or tumors damages in the oculomotor nerve, entire nerve gets damaged, including both somatic as well as autonomic portion, and as a result there is complete ptosis, other paralysis of extraocular muscles supplied by oculomotor nerve, as well as paralysis of sphincter pupillae and ciliary muscle. And in these patients, the pupil will not be reacting properly and pupil will be slightly dilated, as you see in this patient. This patient in picture B is having right smaller pupil, whereas left pupil is dilated, and when it is tested with torchlight, it will not react due to autonomic nerve supply damage. This individual had a tumor that was pressing oculomotor nerve, surgical oculomotor neuropathy. The third variety of neurogenitosis is Horner syndrome. In Horner syndrome, there is a problem at the level of cervical ganglion, superior cervical ganglion or sympathetic trunk. As a result, postganglionic fibers are affected and nerve supply to the molar muscle of the eyelid and dilator muscle of the pupil is affected. So there is slight ptosis, up to 2 mm ptosis in the eye due to damage to the nerve supply of molar muscle of the eyelid. Secondly, pupil gets myos or constricted due to unopposed action of sphincter pupillae, because dilator pupillae supplied by sympathetic nerve is paralyzed. Apart from ocular changes, there is anhidrosis of the ipsilateral side of the face due to autonomic nerve supply damage, sympathetic nerve supply damage. So that was about the etiology of neurogenitosis. Management in these patients is important because see in the picture A, if the patient is like this, having complete ptosis, then we advise investigations, confirm the cause. Most likely we carry out ultrasound B scan, ultrasound scan of orbit, and especially MRI scan of the orbit and brain to see any lesion of the oculomotor nerve. And once it is assured that it is a medical etiology, it is likely to improve within 4 to 6 months of onset. The main problem in this patient would be a diplopia due to abduction of the left eyeball, and we will prevent this double vision if there is incomplete ptosis. Incomplete ptosis, as in this picture, there is no need to occlude the left eye, but in certain people the ptosis is incomplete and patients have diplopia as a result, which has to be taken care. We either patch the eye or we put glasses with occluder in front of left eye to prevent diplopia. And if there is incomplete recovery or no recovery at all after 6 months of the onset, there is very remote chance of recovery, and then we have to resort to surgical treatment. We will discuss later. The third variety of the acquired ptosis is myogenic ptosis. Myogenic ptosis is due to dystrophia myotonica or myotonic dystrophy of the extraocular muscles involving especially the levator muscle, or in some cases myasthenia gravis. In bilateral dystrophic problem, the muscle is neither fully able to contract nor can it relax. As a result, there is mild ptosis, as in this patient, and other problem in these patients is generally weak Bell's phenomena. I had told you in previous lecture what is Bell's phenomena. It is the ability of the cornea to roll up and out when the eye is closed. Because if the eye remains partially open while asleep, the exposed cornea can get exposure keratopathy, and it is the natural reflex, that is Bell's phenomena, that rotates the eyeball up and out, so cornea comes under cover of upper eyelid and it is safe from exposure keratopathy. These myogenic patients with myogenic ptosis, they have weaker Bell's phenomena and they are more prone to this corneal problem, and they should be particularly kept under watch using topical lubricant eye drops during daytime and gels at bedtime. The other problem that can lead to myogenic ptosis is myasthenia gravis. Either the patient is referred to you by physician for evaluation, or the patient reports directly to your clinic in IOPD with a history that my eyes get droopy as the day passes. My eyes are okay in the morning, and as the day passes, the eyes go gradually more and more droopy till in the evening they are fairly big ptosis in both eyes. On examination, you will find that the patient is unable to retain uplifting of the arm, or you ask the patient to comb the hairs or get history of combing, they will say that they cannot continue combing for a long time, particularly ladies, because they take more time for combing. So that is myasthenia gravis clinically, and you carry out laboratory tests for myasthenia gravis, laboratory or radiological test, and treat the patient in the light of your diagnosis or etiology. These patients are not treated surgically generally because results are not good, so they are to be treated by preventing any corneal damage or keratopathy by topical lubricant eye drops and eye gels. Now next slide is the third variety of acquired ptosis, that is aponeurotic ptosis, slide number 9. This ptosis is seen generally in elderly people, and it is due to stretching of the aponeurosis of levator palpebris superioris. It may be without any reason, just by degeneration with aging, that is idiopathic, but commonly it follows a trauma to the lid or surgery, eye surgery, in which we keep the eye patch for 24 to 48 hours in certain cases, and this keeps stretching, and on removing the patch we see development of aponeurotic ptosis as seen in the left eye of this patient. She actually got it after eye surgery and patching for 24 hours. You see, the right eye lid is okay with good lid crease and clear pupillary area, whereas in the left eye the crease has gone very high and eye has drooped. Investigations in this case are not much required because history and examination are the actual findings. And now we will calculate how much is the damage in the coming slides. Treatment is surgical. The aponeurosis, stretched aponeurosis, is partly resected and is advanced and reattached with tarsal plates anteriorly. That is anterior surface of tarsal plate. The last one out of acquired ptosis is mechanical ptosis. Mechanical ptosis develops due to tumors involving upper lid. If they are big enough, by their weight and action of gravity, they push the eyelid a bit down, as you see mild ptosis in this patient having a lid tumor. After having brief evaluation on taking history, clinical examination, now we have to grade the ptosis on the basis of severity. How much is the ptosis? Whether it is mild, moderate or severe. Mild is 1 to 2 millimeter ptosis, moderate is 3 millimeter, and severe is 4 millimeter or more. You will better understand in the next slide, slide number 12, how to measure it. Now we ask the patient to sit in front of the doctor and see a light coming from front. You can see the corneal light reflects in the center of pupil as seen in this diagram. Then you measure the distance between the corneal reflex and lower margin of the upper lid. That is known as margin reflex distance. I mean between the lower margin of the upper lid and the corneal reflex. MRD1 is for the upper lid and MRD2 is for the lower lid. That is not important. MRD1 is important. In the diagram on the right side you see normal MRD. Normal MRD is about 4 millimeter. Why? Because the vertical diameter of the cornea is on the average 11.5 millimeter and half of the cornea is above this corneal light reflex, that is about 5.5 to 5.75 millimeter, out of which upper 1.5 to 2 millimeter is normally covered by the eyelid, upper eyelid. So remaining is the 4 millimeter part of the cornea between corneal light reflex and lower margin of the upper eyelid. So in picture A on your right side, the patient is having normal MRD, that is 4 millimeter, and there is no ptosis. In picture B, the MRD is reduced. MRD here is only 2 millimeter and so the eyelid has drooped by 2 millimeter. This is known as mild ptosis. Drooping of the eyelid by 1 millimeter to 2 millimeter is known as mild ptosis. Here, the MRD is decreased to 2 millimeter from the normal 4 millimeter. If MRD is further reduced, as in picture C, MRD is reduced to only 1 millimeter. That means ptosis is 3 millimeter. This is known as moderate ptosis. 1 to 2 millimeter is mild ptosis, 3 millimeter is moderate ptosis, and 4 millimeter or more is severe ptosis, as you see in the lower picture, that is D, in which you are not seeing the corneal light reflex. It means the distance between lid and reflex is 0 or less than 0, that is toward minus side. So anything 0 or minus side is known as severe ptosis, where MRD is 0 or minus and ptosis is 4 millimeter or more. So this is the way we measure the severity of ptosis by MRD. Remember, MRD, margin reflex distance between lower margin of upper eyelid and the corneal light reflex. We measure it with a transparent rule as shown in upper left picture or diagram. You see 0 is placed at the pupil, center of the pupil and corneal reflex, and you measure the distance between it and the eyelid margin, which is 4 millimeter in this case, and this is a normal patient with no ptosis. Now see slide number 13. The other parameter to measure is the upper lid excursion, ULE. So the two important measurements in a case of ptosis are to measure the severity of the ptosis by assessing the levator function. To measure the severity of ptosis by measuring the MRD, and secondly, to measure the upper lid excursion, as in this case. You ask the patient to look as down as possible in down gaze, as seen in the right part of this picture, and measure the 3 centimeter point at the lower margin of the upper lid, and then ask the patient to look as up as possible, as seen in the left part of the picture, and then measure the distance between the lower portion or 3 millimeter and this one. Here the distance is about 15 millimeter. So 15 millimeter or more elevation of the lid or upper lid excursion is considered normal. Now see the next slide number 14. If the lid excursion is 50 millimeter or more, it is normal. 9 to 15 millimeter is good. 5 to 8 millimeter is fair, and less than 5 millimeter is poor lid excursion. So you should always remember these two measurements. That is MRD, that is assessment of severity of the ptosis, and then there is upper lid excursion, that assesses the levator function. Because on these two criteria we manage the surgery of the patient. Now surgical treatment, slide number 15. First annulus servus is done for mild ptosis with good levator function, levator resection for moderate ptosis and fair levator function, and brow suspension procedure for severe ptosis and poor levator function. Aponeurotic strengthening procedure, I have told advancement and resection in case of aponeurotic ptosis. Now slide number 16 onwards are actual procedures. You will see these in detail and you will not forget, hopefully. Now this first annulus servus operation is done for mild ptosis with good levator function. Mild ptosis is always associated with normal or good levator function. Moderate ptosis has always either fair or good levator function, whereas severe ptosis is always having poor levator function. So if the ptosis is mild with good levator function, ULE is levator function or upper limb excursion. ULE upper limb excursion is same as the levator function. So what we do in first annulus thorax operation, we avert the lid and excise 2 mm of the upper portion of the tarsal plate and the conjunctiva, known as tarsoconjunctival resection, and then suture it as shown in the right part of the picture, and then see the result as shown in lower picture. Before surgery, the patient is having mild ptosis, and after surgery, the eyes are looking absolutely normal. So it is a treatment of mild ptosis with good levator function. Other procedure is levator function resection. Resection of the levator muscle. You must be knowing about resection of the extraocular muscle like recti in squint surgery. Similar procedure is done for ptosis. When ptosis is moderate and levator function is at least fair. Fair or good levator function is required for successful surgery of moderate ptosis. If the function is not fair, it is poor, then this will be failing and we will go to this brow suspension. Now what we do in this section, we open the lid anteriorly or posteriorly at the crease, expose the levator muscle and resect the desired amount as seen in these photographs, and then suture the cut in the muscle with the tarsal plate. This is done for moderate ptosis and fair or good upper levator excursion. The next slide is showing frontalis brow suspension procedure. What is brow suspension? Here the eyelid that is very highly ptotic, generally it is severe ptosis, where pupil is covered 4 mm or more, and very poor levator function, that is less than 5 mm. Second indication for it is Marcus-Gunn jaw-winking syndrome, in which there is aberrant connection between the oculomotor nerve and mandibular nerve, and jaw-winking is phenomena as we move the jaw up and down or side to side. Our eyelid opens and closes, which is very abnormal looking cosmetically. So for these two, we carry out brow suspension procedure. It can be used by silicone tube, Prolene sutures or fasciolata. Before the age of 3 years, once the fasciolata is not fully developed, we use silicone tube or Prolene suture, and after 3 years of age, we take the fasciolata of the patient. This tensor fasciolata is very tense and healthy autologous tissue, and that is good for surgery after the age of 3 years because there is no chance of any foreign body reaction. So what we do, we attach the tarsal plate of the patient with the pentagon under the subcutaneous tissue. First attach it with the skin of the eyelid, subcutaneous tissue of the eyebrow, and then with the forehead, in which we deeply attach it with the aponeurosis of the frontalis muscle. So here, not only that it neutralizes the cosmetic appearance of the patient, eye is looking very good and very healthy, and as if it is normal eye, we can use the frontalis function to elevate or depress the eyelid as and when required. So it is a good procedure for severe ptosis with poor levator function or Marcus-Gunn jaw-winking or synkinetic ptosis. Now that was all about ptosis. The next topic is xanthelasma. Xanthelasma is the fairly common benign tumor of the middle portions of the eyelids, especially affecting the women in their middle age onwards, and generally those having hypertension, hyperlipidemia, or diabetes, etc. This yellowish-white discoloration is present in the subcutaneous tissue or intradermal tissue. It has no symptom except for cosmetic appearance, and treatment in our setup is surgical excision. Other uncommon tumors are port wine stain, as seen in these pictures. It is of your clinical knowledge only, because generally these are not treated and they have systemic problem, hematomatous lesion with systemic problems. And if the patient comes to you for the first time, you should see it, write down your findings and refer the patient to physician. But we should definitely see the dilated fundoscopy in these patients to see any such tumor or vascular angiomatous lesion on the retina, because that may cause visual problem. The most important tumor of the eyelid is basal cell carcinoma or rodent ulcer. It is the commonest of the malignant eyelid tumors affecting elderly people, especially in tropical and subtropical areas. It involves the middle portion of the lower eyelid frequently, but can involve any other portion of the lid. It is a locally malignant tumor and does not metastasize to other tissues through lymphatics or through blood vessels. So you don't see any lymphadenopathy or peripheral vascular metastasis. It is locally malignant, causes local extension and destruction of the tissues. For descriptive purpose, it is divided into nodular ulcerative and sclerosing varieties, as you see in next slide number 22. Now in this slide you see the most common presentation is nodular ulcerative tumor. Here you see the patient reports with persistent lesion at the eyelid margin, away from the lid margin, generally on the medial side of the lower lid. There is pigmented lesion with irregular floor and elevated rolled out margins. This is a classical feature of a nodular ulcerative BCC or rodent ulcer. Why it is known as rodent ulcer? Because the rolled margins show the penetration of the tumor under the skin about 3 to 4 millimeter away from the visible margins of the tumor. Just like rodent, it buries under the skin, so it is known as rodent ulcer. The other varieties are nodular lesion, as seen in lower left picture. Here frequently we get confused that whether it is tumor or it is chalazion. Many a time by the junior ophthalmologist, this patient comes to you after repeated failed chalazion surgeries. This is considered as chalazion, operated, recurs, then operated again, then recurs, and ultimately reaching some tertiary care eye hospital, where we see that it is clinically a type of nodular basal cell carcinoma, and then we treat it accordingly. The third variety and the least common is sclerosing, in which there is fibrosis in the tumor. It causes a sort of contraction, and this fibrosis extends under the surface of the skin, and the initial problem is severe eczema, and due to continuous scarring, the patient may develop minor degree of cicatricial ectropion. Now see the next slide. How to treat it? Treatment is surgery. Surgical treatment is the prime treatment for the tumor. We take care of not only excising the tumor, but always excise 4 millimeter of healthy tissue around the tumor, because the tumor must have reached there as well. So, other minor variety of surgeries include cryosurgery. If the tumor size is less than 10 millimeter, it can be treated by cryo, and a well circumscribed lesion can be treated by laser microsurgery. The second option of treatment is radiotherapy. So, the treatment is primarily surgery. Always remember a scene of the tissue of the tumor along with 4 millimeter of the healthy skin around the tumor. The second option is radiotherapy because it is highly sensitive to radiation. Now that's it about the lecture of today. Remember, all of it read from your book, and you are free to ask for any query or question from me at any time. I will send you a small assignment which you will fulfill and send back within an hour. Thank you very much.